A whole lot of our work early when you call us is we're going to be talking to you about what it is that you've got and where do you want to go. We're going to live in strategy for you because the actual performance of the 1031 is paperwork. But the value of the 1031 is in helping you get where you want to go. So a lot of those consultations, a lot of the early phone calls are going to be, where do you want to go? So this is what you're going to have to do. The 1031 actually starts with the closing of the sale of the old property. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You don't go buy, it doesn't start buying. It starts with your sale and ends with a new purchase. So the best time to get your QI involved is as soon as you have a contract for sale, officially. Up till then, it's all about strategy. It's all about understanding what your requirements are going to be.
I think more people need to hear this story because I think people get stuck like, oh, I'll never be that person that can go out and like, listen, that's what I'm seeing more and more because not everyone wants to be this big tycoon. I think we see social media, we see these Grant Cardones of the world. That's great that Grant is so driven and I love what he does, but some people want more of, more time where they don't need to be selling or doing anything, right? Like I know, like for me, for example, it's like I love creating content and, I originate loans and I buy real estate. But at the end of the day, I'm realizing at 45 years old, we got to be more strategic. We have to be more strategic. Being strategic, I would have been 10 times ahead, right? With like 100% less effort. And that's the key of being strategic. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Investor Financing Podcast. On today's show, we're going to discuss 1031 exchanges, and I'm super excited because I actually just financed a deal, and I was pretty surprised. They were doing 1031 exchange, and I don't know who their intermediary is or was, and I was like, I don't think that's right, but I want to get some feedback from you on this because this was like a burning question. I was excited that we had this interview book. So they bought a property and it was a single family home. They remodeled it and then they 1031 exchanged it and they never rented it or anything. And it was owned less than a year. And I'm wondering if that was kosher advice or if that's kind of like, maybe you're going to get your butt handed to you.
Good question. Well, thank you for those kind words, Beau, by the way. It's not often that you hear really excited and 1031 exchanges in the same sentence. It's some of your typical just boring tax kind of junk. But that's a really interesting scenario. The 1031 exchange exists specifically for the sale of investment property and the purchase of investment property. Now, there's two phrases that the IRS uses. Like kind, which everybody's heard. And what like kind means is that it only has to be real estate. So in your world, you have a ton of people that move back and forth between sectors. They decide to go from single families into multi to commercial to agricultural land. That's all fine. That's all like kind. But the other phrase that the IRS uses, and this is where we get into your question, is qualified use. And what qualified use means is that it is property that you purchased with the intent of holding for productive use in business, trade, or for investment. So I kind of see the smirk. You're already seeing where 5,000 lawyers landed. Ooh, it's intent. There is no statutory holding period. But it cannot have been your intent to simply resell it. So in your client's case, what's it look like?
So what's the CYA on that? If your intent was to keep it, how do you document that you tried to lease it, it didn't lease out? I mean, would that be, I'm just wondering because I used to do a lot of flips, yeah. Right? And so if I had the intent to rehab the house and then rent it, but then I decided to sell it because I wanted to take those proceeds to buy this other 2-unit property. How do I document it to cover my behind?
Sure. Well, there's a whole range. I mean, go from one extreme to the other. So one extreme would be actually rent it out, hold it across a year. That's one key factor right there. Just about everybody feels comfortable if you've owned the property for more than 1 year. There used to be this mantra in our industry, a year and a day, a year and a day. It wasn't magic. All it meant was that if you held it a year and a day, you moved from ordinary income into capital gains, long-term capital gains. Well, it's hard to argue when you're using the IRS's phrase, long-term. The other thing is that it also means that no matter when you bought it, the purchase and the sale are on 2 different tax returns. And no matter when you bought it and when you sold it, it goes across a calendar year. And the IRS has actually used all 3 phrases: 2 tax years, 2 calendar years, 2 years. So where in the middle does all that fly? Well, there's one extreme, but back up from that, can you generate some rent? Can you hold it across a year? Did you have conversations, written emails with your accountants? Did you have performance that you can document that were created during that time? Did you hire a property management team ahead of time? All those sorts of things go to demonstrate your intent. At the end of the day, anything can be used for you, but just don't ever forget that the IRS also can use anything against you. So there's one famous case in recent years where a gentleman purchased a property, got caught in the recession of '08, and he was trying to sell a development, and it did not sell for 12 years. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was 12 years was the length of time that he held it. The problem was he did a 1031 exchange. I just looked at it and said, no. Well, I held it for this forever. He had never taken the listing off of the MLS or the sign off the land. So his intent all along, he was trying to sell it. So that's where you've got to really be careful. And what I try to tell people is, first of all, use the mirror test. Look yourself in the mirror, say, I bought this to hold. And if you can say that without laughing, then do the 1031 exchange. Because you should never do something just because you can get away with it. And we all know that audit rates are horribly low. I don't know about you, the IRS still has not processed my 2021 tax return. They're in a world of hurt. But you never want to do anything just because it may not be scrutinized. But by the same token, don't ever not do anything just because you're scared it'll be looked at, if it's right. So in your client's case, they might have had this really nice paper trail of their intent. What if that house next door became a meth lab? Well, you don't want to keep a rental there. I had a guy that sold a house in Gatlinburg, near Gatlinburg, last year. He'd owned for 60 days. And I challenged him on it. I said, come on, are you sure you didn't buy this to flip it?
His intent was to keep it as a short-term rental, that the numbers weren't performing. And that's
even better than that.
Okay.
He had to agree to honor the lease of the tenant that was in there now. So he had a long-term tenant he had to honor. And I said, but wait a minute, you still are selling it. He said, well, the tenant moved out. I'm going, okay, why? The bear. What? He had ring photographs of the bear that took up residency at the tenant's trash can. Tenant scared of the bear, tenant moves. He's got a property with a bear that he didn't want to own as a rental. So he sold it and did a 1031 exchange. Is that demonstrable intent? His accountant sure seemed to think so. I don't know if the IRS wants to argue with a bear or not. But that's kind of the long and short. There's a lot of that in the statute that's very gray. And you're left to make your own decisions. Just understanding that at the end of the day, the IRS might disagree.
When somebody's, potentially thinking about doing a 1031, or potentially they're trying to do a reverse 1031 exchange, what would be the process if they don't have a go-to for exchange facilitation, a company like yourself? What would you advise somebody out there that's looking for an exchange company to work with? Like, what are the vetting questions you would ask?
Right. So in the this is truth is stranger than fiction. The fact that we are called qualified intermediaries doesn't imply any level of education or certification. As a matter of fact, the IRS specifically says that you are qualified as an intermediary if you are not disqualified. It's in the statute. Isn't that lovely?
Mm-hmm.
So what disqualifies you? Only if you have a familial or a business relationship of some other sorts with the client. So basically, a barber down the street could be a QI. They could be your QI. Your barber could not be your QI because you have a relationship. So don't let the word qualified give you any sense of comfort. Absolutely the best source for feedback is going to be other people that have used them. Talk to referrals, talk to people who've done them, verify that they've been in the business for more than 4 or 5 years. Because why? People jump into business when the market's booming. But if they don't have experience in handling transactions across the entire range of a cycle, you can very easily get caught with some behavior that's not there. So in terms of experience, it's longevity, it's demonstrated experience from other clients. The other biggest thing that most people worry about, and they should, is the security of funds. Because as you know, the 1031 has to be documented on the transactions, settlement statements, but also you cannot touch the money. You can't have control of it. You can't have it in your bank account. The QI has to have it. Well, that's a scary kind of thing. And 99% of the QIs out there in America will keep a trust account, just like an attorney, just like a title company. There's nothing wrong with that. They will typically have them bonded. But my issue is twofold. Number one, all the bonding in the world, all the insurance in the world doesn't keep a bad event from happening. It only seeks to protect you after a bad event has happened. And I'm not comfortable going that far in my own life. I want to even prevent rather than try to fix a bad event. The second issue that I have with that is that when everything is in a pooled trust account, if someone else has an exchange going, their money's in that account, and that person has a lawsuit filed against them. They go through a divorce. Something like that is happening. The very first thing that's going to happen is the receiver is going to be appointed. That receiver is going to freeze every account where their money is being held. Now, I'm not at all worried that your money's at risk. There's a ton of safeguards for you with all of this. But am I worried that your money might be held up so that you miss the closing date? Absolutely. So the best thing that you can do is find a QI that keeps your funds in what's called a segregated dual signatory account. There's not many out there, but I really highly recommend it, particularly because you just don't want to be in the same pool with all kinds of other people you don't know. And a dual signatory account, we set up, they're FDIC insured because they're an individual bank account that's in your name. So you're a signer on that account. Money can't move without your signature. And more importantly, nobody else's situation impacts your account. Now, the QI also has to be a signer on that account because that keeps you from having constructive control. But if it's set up so they're dual signatory, then the QI cannot move money, or money cannot be moved without your signature. That protects you from the QI. You cannot move money without the QI signature. That protects you from the IRS. And I would look for those two things: demonstrated experience and referrals, and then segregated accounts. And, along with demonstrated experience, Section 1031 is 2 paragraphs of the statute, but it's 10,000 pages of case law. So the ability to understand not just what 2 paragraphs say, how to fill out forms, but how to help you structure these things, and in particular, strategically. 1031 is a long game. It's not something you wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to do a 1031 exchange and defer the tax. No, you want to take a look at how to structure it so that you can keep that tax deferred throughout your investing career. Because there's ways to do it through your entire life and never pay a penny in capital gains tax. So being strategic is pretty important.
So a lot of these syndicators, these multifamily syndicators, they don't usually 1031 exchange because they have GPs and LPs.
Right.
Is there a you can't partially 1031 just your ownership, or can you? Or it depends?
Well, into a syndication, not so much, but boy, do I have a couple good ideas for you, because we're starting to use these right now with a lot of people. So syndications don't work because with a 1031, you're selling real estate. You have to buy actual real estate. Most syndications, 99% of them, are set up so what you're buying is a membership interest in the LP or the LLC. So you're not buying real estate. You're buying an interest in an entity that owns real estate. So how can you still make that work? Well, there's a growing number of syndicators out there that are starting to create their framework so that to the certain right investor, they actually sell you a percentage of the property. So you 1031, you sell your property, you buy a percentage of their property, and the two of you, the syndication and you, are tenants in common.
So that works. It's a tick.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
That's interesting. So all these syndicators, or a lot of investors typically, are doing cost segregation. They're accelerating depreciation. How does that play in, if at all, to an exchange other than deferring more down the road? Is there like a layman's explanation of how that might apply?
Well, yeah. One of the motivators that syndicators will use to get people to give up their 1031 exchange and buying the syndication is, you know what, you're going to pay the tax, but we're doing this massive cost segregation in year one. So in the year that you have to pay the tax, you're going to get all this bonus depreciation that's going to offset the tax you pay on the 1031. Sounds cool, doesn't it? I mean, it works, right? So I've got this gain in a tax bill from vacating my 1031, but then I get bonus depreciation from the syndication. So I'm able to offset and not pay tax. That's cool. The problem with this, though, is that 3-4 years down the road, when the syndication sells, depreciation is not a free thing. You have to recapture that depreciation and pay it back. And when you pay it back, now you don't have the tool of the 1031 to be able to defer it.
So have you seen people going, oh, well, I'm going to 1031 exchange into the syndication? Because I don't know if it's, I know there's ways of doing it, but I don't think it's common that somebody 1031 into a large syndication onto the LP side.
Yeah, it's not that common. There's some that'll do it, but typically they're requiring $1 million to go in, and the average 1031 is like $400,000. So really, most people. Now, here's what a lot of my clients are doing, and it works beautifully. You separate 1031 eligible activities from your other investment activities. So either you use your qualified retirement accounts to invest in syndications, or if you want to get the bonus, the benefit of all the depreciation, just put them in a separate basket. And on the 1031 side, keep deferring the tax by doing 1031 exchanges. But then after you sell, do a 1031 and buy, then do a cash out refinance. Pull that cash out, which is not a taxable event,
Right.
and use that to go invest in your syndication bucket.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing, right? And that's
massively huge.
yeah, and that's why people is there a difference like 1031ing exchanging a hotel, which is more of an active business, versus like a piece of just, like a multifamily asset? Because is there differences in the approach of that, or is it's going to be a 1031?
There's actually some kind of unique opportunities within that. Those are what we would call mixed use properties. Maybe properties where there is a business that, like the building that you have your restaurant in. So when you 1031 it, the 1031 is only for real estate. So you're going to be able to do just a regular 1031 exchange as part of that sale. The real estate portion, you do a 1031 exchange on, go buy new real estate. The other stuff, which would be, there's really two other buckets. The FF&E, which is furnishings, fixtures, and equipment. That's not real estate, so it's not 1031able. It all has a basis. It's all been depreciated. So you have to be very careful how much is allocated to that, or you're going to end up with a big tax bill anyways.
So ideally, if I'm hearing you correct, and it would be advantageous if the real estate happened to be worth a lot more than the business value. And then maybe you sell the business on terms and on installment sale, so you're only paying tax for that tax year on the installment amount.
Et voila. That's the great dance of the negotiation. The third party is goodwill or blue sky or whatever, profit. That's not deductible at all. So you're absolutely right. If you're selling, you want the greatest allocation towards real estate on the contract that you can, because you're going to be able to defer the tax and everything. Now, the other side of that is if you're the buyer, all of that FF&E, you can probably deduct in the first year. So you want the highest valuation of that.
That's Section 179, right? Section 179.
Yeah. Yep. So the attorneys are just going to be dancing around the room with each other.
Yeah.
And it's going to end up somewhere. Yeah.
But yeah, this is amazing though, because it's like, this is the part where all the wealthy play, right? They're doing this. This is like stuff that the average Joe real estate people, this is why you guys got to get on podcasts like this and get in front of people that can give you a little insight on how things are structured. And it seems like that's the way we learn, right? We hear these kind of things and we're like, okay, I didn't know that. Now, I have never personally done a 1031 exchange. I have a bunch of real estate, but as I'm mentally preparing now, it's like, these are good things to know, right? So, because if you can start planning, you can make very strategic moves. Like if I owned a vacant parcel and my intent was to build it on it and keep as a rental, but I ended up not being able to build on it, or just it was too difficult, and I sell it, I could 1031 exchange those proceeds. I've owned it for 5 years. The little fourplexes I have, you can 1031 exchange. I mean, it makes sense. Like I always think in my head, how do we grow the fastest way? I have this fourplex. I have $100,000 of equity after I sell. It goes to, get the QI involved. 100 grand sits there. I was making, let's just say, $1,000 a month of cash flow. Now I take that 100,000, I buy $1 million property, right? And now I have 5,000 a month in net cash flow. And it was just these strategic moves. And that's what the 1031 exchange is really, really amazing about.
Well, and you're speaking also right where you're at. And one thing that's really cool about the 1031 concept and the strategy behind it is that other people who are listening are in a different place from you and from me. Every investor has a life cycle, and they're fairly common and consistent in how they move, but we're all at different parts. And yet the 1031 can be strategically used to take you from the beginning to the end of your life without ever paying the tax, because you're using it strategically. You want to talk about the 4 Ds of 1031 investing?
Yes.
All right. So D number 1 is defer. Because that's how it starts. You have a property like yours with a lot of gain in it. You want to grow. You want to do something. You want to make more money, more cash flow, better ROI, whatever. Do the 1031 exchange. Because when you do, all of the deferred tax that would have gone to the government is now being used by you to generate income for you. So it's like compounding interest. You get to make the money off the deferred tax, and then you get to make the money off the money you made on the deferred tax, and it just starts to roll. And that's how it all starts. An argument that people use against this is, I got to pay the tax someday anyways. So what do I care now? And I've got two answers to that. Hang on for the third and fourth D. And secondly, why do you have a 401k? Because every day that I'm using the government's dollars is a day I make more money. If that lasts a year, great. If it lasts 30 years, even better. So the second D, defer. Because you can use the 1031 exchange wherever you find yourself in your life cycle, just like you started to describe. Did you start investing in a certain class, single family rentals, and you want to scale up into multis? The 1031 exchange lets you. Remember, like kind, any kind of investment real estate, anywhere in the United States. So what if you started investing in California? Appreciation's awesome, isn't it? Cash flow pretty much sucks, which is why you have a lot of neighbors now, don't you, in Las Vegas who are coming down from California in droves.
I was from California.
Yeah, there you go. You made the move because there's better cash flow, isn't there? So you use the 1031 exchange to go into different sectors, to go from appreciation to cash flow, to go find, where were you at in California? Were you up north?
Yeah, Northern California, Walnut Creek, but Bay Area. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So do you remember like 2013, 14? The Bay was just sizzling. And a few hardy people said, I really like what Tesla's doing in Austin. And man, our price is cheap in Austin. They 1031 exchanged into Austin, where they could buy vast amounts of real estate for what they could sell their 2-story flat in San Jose for. What happened in Austin now? All of that because they were able to 1031. So it's an awesome opportunity to continue to shape your portfolio. Guess what the third D is?
Defer.
Bingo. Because as you're going along and you start to get towards the end, you can also use the 1031 exchange to go from active to passive management. It could be as tenants in common on a project. It could be a syndicator that lets you buy as a tenant in common. It could be simply going from a whole bunch of single family rentals that are taking a lot of your time into one multifamily building that takes less of your time or has in-house management. Or it could be starting to position your portfolio from where you live in Cincinnati, where it's cold, to Siesta Key, where it's warm, and you want to retire. So that when you retire in a couple of years, your portfolio awaits you and you're not worried about being a long-distance landlord. So the third D lets you move your portfolio to be with you throughout your life and to decrease your workload at a time when you want to. Now, there's another crazy benefit here that not many people know about this hack. The 1031 exchange is for a sale and purchase of investment property, right? You do not have to keep that property as investment forever.
Move in.
Move in. What happens when you move in?
I have the exemption, $250 for a single person, $500,000 for married.
That's exactly right. Now, it's not quite as sweet as that. You have to have owned it for 5 years, lived in it for 2. And when it's a property that you convert, you have to prorate the gain in between the years when It was rented and you lived in it. So if you do a 1031 exchange, the folks in Cincinnati, when they retire, they're going to sell that house up there. That's tax-free, right? But why do we want to make them reinvest tax-free dollars to buy another house? Why don't they move into one of their rental properties on the beach in Siesta Key and convert that to their primary residence? So the sale of Cincinnati, tax-free. They convert a property. 5 years later, have they owned it for 5 years? Yes. Did they live in it for 2 out of the previous 5? Well, they rented it for 2, then they lived in it for 3. So the answer is yes. So they could sell it then and get 60% of the profit. Now that's the deferred profit over 20 years of investing. Tax-free.
I know. I've heard about that before, and it's just like amazing. I mean, so I exchanged this fourplex I have in Indiana into, let's say, a cool place here in Las Vegas. Keep it as a rental for at least 2 years. I decided to make that my primary residence because I like it better. And then I live in there for 5 years straight. And then how do you figure out the proration? So it was rented for 2. I lived in there for 5.
So you owned it for a total of 7?
Yeah.
It was rented for 2 and you lived in it for 5?
Yep.
So you would get 5/7 of the profit tax-free.
Okay.
Living it for 8 years after renting it for 2, 80% of the profit tax-free. I've got a realtor on St. Pete Beach. That's his retirement job. He quit selling real estate. He has 3 identical condos on the same floor.
Yeah.
He moved into the first one. In a few years, they'll sell it. It's tax-free. Where's he going to move? Into the next one.
Yeah.
And so the third D is this process of starting to turn a lifetime of tax deferred into at least partial tax-free.
I love it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is like wealth. We sometimes like these newer investors, they go, oh, I want to like get started. They go, well, just go buy your first house, maybe buy a duplex and live in one side, right? But like this is the evolution of the House Act. So like people that are watching this that like think, oh, I'll never be a big real estate investor. You really don't need to be. If you House Act, you live in this duplex, you live for free, whatever. You refinance that, you go buy your first investment property. And then you play, like, if you just make a few strategic moves throughout your life, it's I think people get overwhelmed, like, oh, I got to do all this stuff and buy all these properties to ever get like, but look at these strategic moves you can make, like, and that's why it's like even me, I'm like, man, if I would have just been more strategic. I bought my first house. I'm 45 now. I bought my first house when I was 22 years old in San Ramon, California, and I bought it on a lease option and exercised the option. It was already worth like 50 grand more when I exercised the option. But I go back to that now, and it's like, if I would have just been more strategic and kept that as a rental property all these years, that same property is 1.3 million. Or maybe I could have moved back in that house, right? Like, there's all these things you can do to like, and so it's really an amazing tool, the 1031 exchange. A lot of people should be utilizing this. And it's like, I just want to kind of I know I want to go into not in the weeds, but can you give us like the process? We'll just use me, for example, 1031 exchanging this fourplex in Indiana. There's about $100,000. Like, what does the process look like? Let's just say I went to your website, 1031investor.com. I booked a call with your team, and like, walk me through the next process until, identification, the timelines, and then what everything looks like.
Okay, so a whole lot of our work early when you call us is we're going to be talking to you about what it is that you've got and where do you want to go. We're going to live in strategy for you, because the actual performance of the 1031 is paperwork, but the value of the 1031 is in helping you get where you want to go. So a lot of those consultations, a lot of the early phone calls are going to be, where do you want to go? So this is what you're going to have to do. The 1031 actually starts with the closing of the sale of the old property. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You don't go buy, doesn't start buying. It starts with your sale and ends with a new purchase. So The best time to get your QI involved is as soon as you have a contract for sale, officially. Up till then, it's all about strategy. It's all about understanding what your requirements are going to be, how to get there. You get a contract for sale, we interact with the title company or attorney that's handling that closing. There's certain documents that have to be present. There's certain wordings that have to be on the settlement statement. The proceeds have to go directly to your account with us. You can't touch the money at all. And that starts your 1031 exchange. Now, I get calls every month, literally every month, from someone who says, I closed my real estate last week. I'm ready to do my 1031. All I can do is cry with them, Beau, because they're toast. They're paying the tax. The QI has to be involved prior to the closing of the sale. Now, from that date, you've got 45 days to identify your potential replacement properties. Now, you may have already found a property before you even sold your old one and have it under contract. That's fine. We just have to close the sale before closing the purchase. But if you need the time, you've got another 45 days to shop. After day 45, whatever's on your list, you're stuck with.
Yeah, so 45 days to identify, and then
another 135 to finish the purchase.
Okay, got it.
Total of 180.
Got it. And can you just touch on why we would do a reverse exchange? Like if I bought something and then sold something, why
Sure.
would that be a use case there?
Because the statutory order of the 1031 is that you have to sell first before you take title to your new property. A reverse exchange does not change that. But in a reverse exchange, we form a holding entity called the exchange accommodating title holder, and that entity takes title to the new property and holds it until you've sold your old property. Now, you live in the world of funding, so this is huge because that's probably the single biggest complication, is that in order to buy that new property, you've got to have the pros of the money. If you don't have cash, you've got to find lending. And it's not going to be from a traditional lending source.
Because they're going to make the loan to this
to the entity,
to the entity. So there can't really be. Can the borrower or is the person that's going to do the reverse 1031 exchange? Can they legally sign for that entity? Or
yes.
Okay.
Well, no, they can't sign for the entity, but they can guarantee the loan.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Yeah. So just a hard money loan. Bridge loan, we call
That's
it.
exactly right.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand that, though, and they get hung up and they don't know. They say, I can't find a lender. Well, that's because you're looking at all the normal sources.
Yeah.
You need to go call Beau because he
knows.
Beau knows. There you exactly. Go. So we take it now. Here's where the reverse exchange has its real power. If you get caught needing to purchase your new property first, sure, that makes sense. But here's the real power. What if you're selling a property for $500,000? And you've got this juicy little $300,000 value add project that you want to buy. Well, one of the requirements of the 1031 to defer all tax is that you have to purchase at least as much as you sell. That's $500,000.
Yeah.
But that purchase is only going to take up $300,000. So you could buy another property, or you could do a reverse improvement exchange so that you could add the value of the improvements into the 1031 exchange. Because remember, who's officially improving the property is the entity that we've set up. So you're selling for 500 and you're buying for 500, but what are you getting? You're getting basically a brand new property with all the value add already in it.
So that's still a reverse exchange. Okay. And then the entity that we set up, so that extra, it's not called boot, but that extra 200,000, which is needed to repair this $300,000 house, it goes to the entity and can fund it just like a rehab loan or something like that.
That's exactly right. That's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, because you can basically do a value add project tax free.
Tax free.
Tax deferred. Right?
I'll argue that because we haven't talked about the fourth D yet. But
Death.
tax deferred, I'll give it to you.
Death. We're going to talk about death, and
How
because when
did
it
you
goes
know?
to your estate, right? There you can, unless you have a super huge estate, then you right.
Yeah, the estate limit now is like 13 million. So
Yeah.
okay.
So if
For
I
the
had
rest of us,
yeah, for the rest of us little peons out there, right?
yeah, when you die, your property gets a step up in value. So your heirs inherit it as if they paid market value for it. You don't pay the tax. Your estate doesn't pay the tax. They don't pay the tax. It literally does disappear. So to all those naysayers that say you're going to have to pay it someday, I say, nope, not true.
What do you think about? And I know you don't dabble in this, but you probably know about it. Deferred sales trust. Is there any value in any to do a deferred sales trust for any, maybe like a business exchange? But it seems like so much work. Have you ever just like, because you're
Yeah, I've looked into them for myself, and I don't feel comfortable rendering an opinion other than just for Dave as an individual. It appears to me that I'm going to be trusting a third party to do something where I don't have recourse.
Hi, this is Beau Eckstein, host of the Investor Financing Podcast. Are you a real estate investor with properties and you're trying to figure out how to refinance or grow your existing real estate business? Need some clarity and a game plan for moving forward? I'm offering a free strategy call where we dive deep on your real estate investing goals. I'll help you come up with a strategic finance plan that will help you get to where you want to go. Whether you've got a portfolio of 30 properties or you're starting out with your first property, I have a framework that has helped many investors grow. If you're interested, book a call below in the Calendly link. You know, the best thing you can do is educate yourself, get around people, understand. I mean, you as the person that's going to do the 1031 exchange, you need to ask these questions. You need to know these, you need to get in front of the right person that's going to like protect, give you the information that you need. Like, that's why when I saw this last deal and I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, but maybe they structured it in a way to like, I don't know about, but probably they pushed the envelope a little bit, is my guess. And, good for each his own. But at the end of the day, it's that one time that you get audited, right? That you learn your lesson. Like the IRS randomly audits you and goes, okay, well, I need receipts for the last 5 years. And you're like, so I get it. Like you always want a paper trail, document everything. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So curious on how you got into this industry.
That's a great story because it's a story of my life cycle as a real estate investor. We were living in Denver, Colorado. My wife and I both had pressure cooker careers, and we had our first child. And we realized that the greatest commodity in our lives is not money, is not possessions, it's time. Time is what limits you. And by the way, before I even go one step further, you are so right on in what you said when you said it doesn't take a lot. Every success story we see out there from the gurus and everybody who are trying to pump their product or brag to you about what they've done, they talk about how big they are. I'm here to tell you, I see more millionaires in real estate who have never owned more than 4 or 5 properties at a time. It doesn't have to be hundreds of properties for you to have a great life, but realize that time is really what you want to be conscious of. Yeah. So we were trying to figure out, well, okay, we'd kind of like to go buy a sailboat and get off grid and raise our kids. How can we do that? And like so many people today, we said, real estate, let's do it. So because I'm a total fan of Ready, Fire, Aim, I just went and bought a duplex in Denver, fixed it up, sold it, made a bunch of money, and then went to my accountant. Wrong order, because he said, Dave, don't you realize you've got a silent partner? And his name is Uncle Sam. And you're going to pay for it this year. Crap. Well, so right at that time in 1995-ish, this big case law around 1031 exchanges had been settled, where the IRS lost. And now it acts just like we do today. So everyday investors like you and I could do 1031 exchanges. And I'm a degreed accountant, so I discovered that. I went, oh, that's the answer. So from that point forward, everything that we did was either a Section 121 primary residence exemption, it was a conversion of an investment property into primary residence, or it was a 1031 exchange into the next type of property or market where we wanted to be. And in 10 years, we moved our portfolio from Denver to Stamford, Connecticut to Fort Myers, Florida. 10 years to the week of setting our 10-year goal. We stepped aboard our boat, sailed away, and raised our kids for 10 years with a tax-free boat from the primary residence sales, making a living off of helping people with 1031s and living off our vacation rental portfolio of 4 properties.
Beautiful. I think more people need to hear this story, because I think people get stuck like, oh, I'll never be that person that can go out and own. Like, listen, that's what I'm seeing more and more, because not everyone wants to be this big tycoon. I think we see social media, we see these Grant Cardones of the world. That's great that Grant is so driven, and I love what he does, but some people want more of, more time where they don't need to be selling or doing anything, right? Like I know, like for me, for example, it's like I love creating content, and I originate loans and I buy real estate. But at the end of the day, I'm realizing at 45 years old, we got to be more strategic. We have to be more strategic. And it's like these moves, and I'll get on, people book calls with me for financing, and I'll get on these calls, and sometimes I know, because I answer some questions. I'm like, this is not going to go anywhere, but they need a little guidance. So I'll give them 15 or 20 minutes to just say, hey, here's some strategic things you can do. But bringing this conversation in, it really kind of opened up my mind even more for the need for this education early on in somebody's journey, right? Like, this is just doing a few things right early on. I just look back at that first San Ramon house. If I would have held on to it, if I would have been more strategic with it, that house is worth 1.2 million right now, right? Like, that's just one of the many houses I've owned and sold because I was flipping houses. Being strategic, I would have been 10 times ahead, right? With 100% less effort. And that's the key of being strategic. And that's why we got to get, people like yourself on the show, right? To open up our minds. Okay. Like I'm thinking, I live in Vegas. My portfolio is in the Midwest. It's like a pain in the butt, right? Like, what if I 1031 exchange? This is being strategic. What if I 1031 exchange those small houses into a multifamily here that I run as a corporate or furnished rental? Or I could do into an executive estate property that eventually I'm going to move into anyways, is the plan. I don't know if I can have that plan yet for the purposes of 1031 exchange, but I 1031 exchange into it. And that's my dream home. And I run as a corporate estate, short-term rental. It cash flows for now. 2 years later, I decide to move in it, turn my primary into there's so many ways of doing it. And it's just instead of doing 100 steps, what we talked about today is you only really need to do 5 steps, right? You don't need to do 100 steps.
Well, there's an example that we use in a lot of our classes. We just didn't have time to put it up today, where with literally 4 transactions, 2 investors who do exactly the same thing, except one 1031s and one pays the tax. They start with a $100,000 gain, which means there's $20,000 in tax, basically, depending on which state you're from. But in fact, the one investor that does 1031s takes that $20,000, and so as a 20% down payment, they're able to buy a $500,000 piece of property. Investor B pays the tax, so they've got less. They can only buy a $400,000 property. 4 transactions later, after 20 years of normal appreciation, the 1031 investor owns $12 million of real estate, simply using deferred tax. Not 400 properties, 4 transactions, 1 property. Investor B owns $3.5 million. Now, they've not done bad for themselves, but look at the power of that deferred tax. That's just huge. And the problem is exactly what you say. When we're young as investors, it's we just don't know what we don't know. We don't even know where to start. And so starting with people like you, with your podcast, with education, we start to learn and grow so that as we go, we can at least start to know what we don't know. And now we can be targeted in fixing problems. Well, here's my scenario, but I don't know how to fix it. What could I do? And by the end of it, you still don't know it all, but you're comfortable not knowing because you're just operating in what you do know. And that's the process of learning.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been a great episode. I feel like we were just sitting at a coffee shop talking, and like this, it always excites me when I get the right guest on the show, because it's like, you know, the energy of just like somebody who has passion. Like I feel your passion, right? Like you're like, you want to help people. You love the concept. Like I love the story about how you decided to get out of the grinder of work, the W-2, the corporate world. Not that the W-2 and corporate world is like, I mean, I think it's good for some people, right? But there's some of us that like, we don't want to be in the rat race. We want to spend more time with the family. We want to live a stress-free life, right? Like the grind of work, even though I'm self-employed, I'm grind, right? Putting together loans is a freaking grind. I hate it, but I love it and I hate it. But at the end of the day, the end goal is that I'm doing more strategic steps. And at a relatively young age, I don't need to do much more, right? Because I've done the steps. I've done these simple steps throughout my career. Now, like, if I could go back with the knowledge I have at 45 and tell young Beau at 22 years old, when you bought that first property, you were really smart because you bought it on a lease option. You figured it out. You moved into it with like 50 grand of equity. That was pretty good, Beau, at 23 years old or 22, whatever the age was. But it was like, I was missing so many steps. So I think, you know, my true calling and why I do the podcast now, and this is resonating with what you're saying, is like, if like one 20-year-old is out there right now, and or even a 50-year-old person, right, that has all this equity and thinking how I'm going to be strategic. I mean, it's really those people too. It's just as important or more important for those people.
Absolutely.
Those strategic moves, like, okay, you have this rental property with $800,000 of equity. Move that into your, you know, the next house you're going to want to move into, like, but you don't know that yet, but you're going to rent it out for 2 years, and then you decide that this will be your dream home and you move into that. I mean, it's just being strategic. So it just opened my mind to so much. And I know
I'm glad.
That's the value of doing these podcasts, right? That's why, like, when we have an episode like this, I'm like, all right, cool. This one, like, there's value being created right here for anybody who's out there.
Well, I'll make a deal with you, Beau. Depending on when you come out with this episode, we're 60 days away from my book. It's in editing and publishing right now. And basically, it's a 20-year culmination of all the stuff we're talking about today and all the strategies that we've used and we've seen investors use and case studies, a lot of good stuff. If you have me back, we can talk about a bunch of that and talk about the next, what's going on with 1031s in the statute.
So I also run a meetup group, and I used to do it in the Bay Area, but I obviously moved, and I still do live events, but we do it virtually now, and I'm setting up virtual meetup groups all over. I'm in the process of it. Anyways, we have like 3,200 members collectively in the groups, but usually, like, you're going to get a very low group that, you know, there's only going to be about 50 or 60 people potentially that jump on a Zoom call. But anyways, when we're going to get off this conversation, I was going to say, hey, would you be interested in speaking there? It'd be, you know, a bunch of people, and this would be pretty cool to do live, and then other people could ask questions and so forth.
I'd love to. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, guys. So anyways, this was a great episode. Go to the 1031investor.com for more information and to connect. This was great. Any other places you want people to follow you or connect with you?
You know what? I'm the Luddite. I have no clue about all that stuff. Just catch us at the 1031 Investor, and we'll look forward to seeing you over there. All
right. Thank you so much, Dave. And thanks, everybody, for joining. Please like, subscribe, and I'll continue to bring great guests on, and we'll talk about awesome topics. Hey guys, Beau Eckstein here. If you enjoyed what you saw, please subscribe to this channel. We talk all things financing. I've been in the lending industry for over 20 years, and I'm happy to answer your questions and provide great content.